Before we start tonight's meeting, I just want to make a note to anyone watching the meeting stream or broadcast on Comcast that we've been having some technical troubles with our meeting broadcasting. So if at any time tonight the meeting stream or broadcast stops, please call 415-508-2132. That's 415-508-2132 to notify staff. Thank you.
Thank you. The Thursday, May 9th, 2019 regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. May I have roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Patel.
Here.
Commissioner Mackin.
Here.
Commissioner Gomez.
Here.
And Chair Sayasan.
Here.
Note for the record, Commissioner Gooding is absent.
Okay. Next will be the adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt, please?
I make a motion.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Consent calendar. Is there anyone who would like to remove an item from the consent calendar? I see no one. May I have a motion to adopt, please?
I move we adopt the consent calendar.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oral communications. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission about an item that's not on tonight's agenda? I see no one. We'll move to written communications. I have a May 7, 2019 letter from API Caucus inviting the Brisbane City Council, Commission, and committee members to its inaugural launch event on May 23rd at Angelica's in Redwood City. Next is a public hearing that was continued from our last meeting concerning 296 San Benito Road, R-1 Residential District, variance B-1-19, and grading review EX-1-19. The applicant has requested that we continue this item to the meeting of May 23rd, 2019. May I have a motion, please?
Motion to continue.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the meeting will be continued. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing regarding Southwest Corner Highway 101 and Beatty Avenue, C-1 Commercial Mixed-Use District, Interim Use Permit UP-1-19. The applicant is seeking an interim use permit to allow existing billboard to remain for 5 additional years. Clear Channel Outdoors the applicant. Oyster Point Properties, Inc. is the owner. Staff, may we have a report?
Yes, thank you. The applicant requests approval of an interim use permit for an existing billboard to remain at the corner of Beatty Avenue and Highway 101 for an additional 5 years. The structure is oriented towards Highway 101 facing north and south with 2 illuminated sign faces of approximately 23 by 60 feet. In 1983, as part of a legal settlement concerning enforcement of the city's billboard prohibition, 6 existing billboards along Bayshore Boulevard were removed, and City Council had conditionally approved use permit UP 482 for the subject billboard. The original use permit was granted for a term of 6 years. Thereafter, the use was granted with additional extensions via the interim use permit on the Baylands. Those are only allowed for 5 years at a time. That's why this is back before you tonight. The staff report detailed the findings required for approval of this interim use permit, and I won't restate all that. Essentially, there have been no material changes in the area of the sign that would make the sign incompatible, and so the continued use would meet all the required findings. I had just a couple additional notes on that. In terms of the finding regarding benefit to the city, a more up-to-date tax revenue was stated by finance just recently of up to about $58,000 for that was last year or the year before, and closer to 50 for one of those 2 years. So it's up a little bit from the 47,000 that was stated. A question also came up as to whether the 8% tax on the billboard was fixed, and that was fixed by a court judgment in the 1983 case. As long as the billboard is permitted to continue by the city, that tax would continue. And those taxes all goes to the city versus general sales tax or other taxes. The question was also raised as to the assurance that the billboard would not impede development of the baylands, and that protection is included as a condition of approval, and the cost for removal is stated to be as being borne by the owner of the sign. In closing, staff recommends conditional approval of use permit UP 119 for the staff memorandum with the attachments containing the resolution and conditions of approval.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question for staff?
I kind of had a little nuance.
Gomez?
Yeah, actually. So thanks for the background on this. It was interesting, reading about it. Have we done any sort of comparative analysis on what the tax percentages are in comparison to, billboards just up the way in San Francisco or just down the freeway off, in South San Francisco? Is it comparable, or do we know?
Staff has not done that.
Okay.
Since this is set by a judgment
No
court
real-
case,
Yeah.
Staff doesn't see a wiggle room there. It's essentially if it meets the findings to continue, you can approve, or if you see that it doesn't meet the findings, then that would need to cease, and so, but I don't see that we have really the latitude to change that tax rate.
Okay. Thank you. This is a general curiosity.
Anybody else? No? Okay, we'll open the public hearing now. Would the applicant like to come and speak?
For the record, my name is Patrick Powers. I work for Clear Channel. We would just concur with staff's recommendation and would like to continue the conditional use permit. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, any questions? I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the public who would like to speak? I see no one. May I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I make a motion to close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, discussion. Seems pretty straightforward. Anybody have anything they'd like to say? Commissioner Mackin.
If we refer to our page H.1.3 in the staff report, a condition at the top of the page, a condition of approval is included that the owner of the sign shall remove it if it is identified as an obstacle to public improvements. I would then refer to H.1.9, conditions of approval B. The applicant shall remove the sign if the city determines that the sign will interfere with or obstruct any planned public improvements that require the use of the site prior to the permit expiration date. I would like to propose a change in the wording there. I would strike the that require use of the site completely. And instead of interfere with or obstruct, I'll give you a proposed substitution, would be if the city determines that the sign will no longer be compatible with the city's plans for the neighborhood.
Is there a reason you would like to make the change?
Public improvements may not necessitate an absolute removal, but it may be incompatible with a change in the neighborhood. And the change in the wording gives the city a little bit more latitude there.
Does anybody have any comments on that? Commissioner Gomez? Commissioner Patel?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? I didn't catch all of the words.
Okay, so letter B.
Yep, got it.
Notwithstanding the 5-year permit term, The applicant shall remove the sign
Yes.
if the city determines that the sign will no longer be compatible with the city's plans for the neighborhood.
Okay. And what's the second sentence?
That,
That was it.
that is the proposal.
Okay.
Well, that is the same language that's in H.1.2. So, I mean,
Yes.
yeah, so you want that
I
consistent.
would like that there instead of what's,
Staff, do you have any issue with that, with the change?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think it strikes the same chord essentially and is a little bit broader in its approach. And so I'm just gonna repeat, so we're just talking about condition B. And I'm gonna read the whole thing as I've got it now, make sure I've got it correct here. Notwithstanding the 5-year permit term, the applicant shall remove the sign if the city determines that the sign will no longer be compatible with the city's plans for the neighborhood. Removal shall be completed within 30 days after written notice to remove is given by the city to the applicant.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if you wanna, I know the public hearing's closed, but I don't know if you wanna ask the applicant if they have any issues. I don't think you have to. It's up.
I'll ask them, would the applicant like to, okay, you don't have any comments? Okay. Okay, so we don't have, yeah, I don't see any, reason not to make the change. I think actually it would fit with, you know, what is the intended purpose of, you know, keeping the billboards there until it's not compatible with our neighborhood. So, is there any other issues that you had? No? So, would anyone like to make a motion?
I would make a motion to approve with the conditions that that language be changed.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a public hearing regarding TC-1 Crocker Park Trade Commercial District zoning text amendment RZ-3-18, and it concerns a proposed zoning text amendment to the TC-1 district regulations contained in Brisbane Municipal Code Chapter 17.19 to establish an exception permit process subject to approval by the zoning administrator to allow limited outdoor storage of flammable materials. The City of Brisbane is the applicant. Staff, may we have a report?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson and Commission. So the zoning text amendment before you tonight is a request to amend the TC1 Crocker Park Trade Commercial District regulations to establish an exception permit process whereby a property owner could apply for a permit to store certain portable or movable containers used to store flammable materials outdoors, subject to certain performance standards and health safety code compliance. So a little background on this application, you'll probably recall a couple months ago we held a study session on the general concept of outdoor storage in Crocker Park. At the time, that was coming from an application submitted by a business owner in the park. Their request in that application for a zoning text amendment was to allow outdoor storage in general in Crocker Park with approval of a use permit. So as explained in detail in the staff report, subsequent to staff evaluating that request in our study session we held where we talked about the general plan and zoning regulations in effect, the North County Fire Authority brought up some concerns with staff on the indoor storage of materials like this, and I'll go into more detail on what these materials actually are, which led us to put forward this zoning text amendment, which is city initiated. So I know it's a little, the timeline may have been a little muddled, but at this point it is a city initiated request. However, the original applicant of the private application has notified staff that they are supportive of of staff's proposed exception permit process to allow certain things to be stored outdoors. So going into the actual text amendments themselves, So again, this would modify the TC1 district regulations to add a new section to the chapter to establish this exception permit process. This would allow outdoor storage of, again, movable containers containing flammable materials. So that could entail gas or liquid materials. It's kind of all-encompassing. And a kind of typical example of what's often seen in the park are like propane, like movable propane tanks, for example, that you might put in like a heater or something. These aren't, again, we kind of talked about the difference between fixed exterior equipment versus these kind of more portable or movable transient materials that are flammable. So that's really what this exception permit process would be focused on. So in the zoning text regulations, the process would emphasize it would be a zoning administrator reviewed permit. So the zoning administrator we have a similar process in place right now for height exceptions for solar. So where a rooftop solar installation exceeds the height limit, the ZA can process an exception permit to allow the solar structure to exceed the height limit with a notification process to neighbors, adjacent neighbors. And we kind of co-opted and thought that was a good model for this type of permit request. So in order to approve the permit, the zoning administrator would have to find that it complies with performance standards, which I'll go over on the next slides, such as being located outside of setbacks, not obstructing parking, and also that it would comply with any health and safety standards. So that's state and local fire and building codes. It would notify adjacent property owners. The property owners would be given 3 weeks to provide written comments to the ZA. And of course, with any ZA application, the ZA may choose to refer applications to the commission based on their context and concerns that it might bring up with the surrounding community. We would also amend the development standards in the TC1 district regulations just to add a cross-reference to this exception permit process, and also add screening and setback requirements for any types of these materials for which an exception permit is approved. We would also amend the performance standard sections, again, to add some cross-references to the exception permit process. So going over, we won't spend too much time on this, but when we're looking at zoning amendments, obviously they need to be consistent with the general plan. So we've studied this in depth, again, at the February 28th meeting. The primary general plan policies that are relevant to the zoning text amendment are in the sub-area policies and programs, which is Chapter 12 of the general plan. So policy Crocker Park 24, or CP 24, which directs major business activities to be conducted inside buildings. Another policy that's applicable is to work with responsible agencies to monitor the use and storage of hazardous materials in accordance with state law. So those are the general plan policies that kind of speak directly to this issue. General plan policies are implemented in the zoning. So the current zoning ordinance regulations does allow outdoor storage of some materials and products that are incidental to, like, shipping. So when something's dropped off or loaded, or pallets, that type of thing, there are already in the code some exceptions to things that can be stored outdoors, recognizing that they're incidental to the primary use, that they're kind of transient in nature, they're not sitting out there, for years. They're being moved, they're doing different things. So in line with that, the zoning text amendments are really trying to balance the kind of health safety concerns of the code requirements that apply to storing such flammable materials indoors, which, again, North County Fire brought this to planning staff's attention, that when they do their annual business walkthroughs, they were finding a lot of need to correct, incorrect storage, basically, of these flammable materials indoors. So state fire and building codes have certain ventilation requirements. There's a certain square footage of how much volume of material can be stored indoors. There were enough issues brought up in their inspections over the years that fire actually was very supportive of allowing these types of materials to be stored outdoors, just so that allows more dissipation, should there be any sort of leak. It eliminates a lot of the safety concerns and conflicts they were observing in their site walks and inspections. So again, that's really kind of driving at this point staff's recommendations for the exception permit process. So at this point, I think I'll end my report and open it up to questions. We are recommending that you recommend approval of the amendments to the City Council by adopting the attached resolution and draft ordinance.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question for staff? Commissioner Mackin?
Thank you, Julia. and Thank you, Madam Chair. For everyone's knowledge, could you clarify first who the zoning administrator is?
Sure, it's the Community Development Director.
Okay. And when we talk about limited outdoor storage, the specified limits, who determines the limits?
So the zoning text amendments, I don't think I put it on my slides here, but if you look at the attachment to the staff report, which is in attachment A, the criteria the zoning administrator would be referring to when considering an application for this would, one, ensure that the location of the outdoor storage area is outside of any setbacks, it's not obstructing parking, it's not interfering with the minimum landscaping requirement for the site, that basically wherever the proposed storage area is, it's not causing any non-conforming situations to arise. Otherwise, it would not be able to be approved. The second kind of performance standard that would apply would be the requirement to screen such materials. That could be through a combination of fencing. Landscaping probably isn't something that would be used, but you know, there's a different ways to screen these things from off-site view. And then the third component would be verified compliance with fire and building state and local codes. So any application would be sent out to our building and fire departments to make sure that any specific criteria that those codes have for, you know, the materials of the screening, or, you know, anything that impacts the design of this outdoor storage area and our screening requirements that we have would be taken into account in that application, and you know, it would be conditioned to comply with such standards. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Additionally, a couple other things. The staff report mentions the original applicant on this and their desire to store portable propane tanks as well as other items. What is the as well as other items related to their business?
So this is in the context of their original application, which is not what this proposal reflects.
But I bring it up only in that if propane tanks are flammable, I'm trying to just get a little clarification just for everybody, anybody, all of us, people at home, whether, for instance, if you had, let's say, solvents or containers of mineral spirits, paint thinner, any kind of varnishes, would those be considered potential items to go outdoors, or are they to be stored indoors in a fire-safe cabinet? And if that's the purview of North County Fire Authority, that's all I need to hear.
Well, yes, I would say that is in the purview of North County Fire Authority, how solvents and other materials like that are stored. I think typically when we see businesses using those kinds of materials, they are stored indoors in fire-safe cabinets. I mean, I'm thinking of like R&D uses particularly, where just for safety and security reasons, those are not the types of materials people would really want to store outdoors. Mm-hmm. But again, should they make that request, it would be up to fire to determine whether or not that's a code-compliant manner in which to store them.
Okay, and so if we follow the trend of thought of North County Fire Authority being the one of local jurisdictional parties, would we be safe to assume that there would be limits placed on the number or volume of these containers?
Whatever is prescribed by the code. I wasn't given any direction from them on that. They did not ask that we put in hard limits as to volume or number. I would imagine it would have to do with the material and the site itself and where they wanted it to be stored.
Right, okay. And also you mentioned, so I just want to pull that out again for verification, that North County Fire Authority does annual inspections. Okay. And
that's of any business in Crocker, as I understand.
Right.
It's a normal,
but
regardless of whether someone had a hypothetical permit.
right,
this
but
situation.
more so that if this is an exception,
Mhm.
that they will be vigilant. Obviously, from what you mentioned, they're going to be vigilant about checking this. And just a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I do know San Francisco regulations where a site map has to show where these things are stored.
Mhm.
And if this is outdoors, is that,
Yes,
we know
so
if
a
that's-
typical application checklist for any of our planning permits has some basic requirements. So a site plan would be, I would consider, an essential component of an application checklist, as would a project description. I mean, we have a standardized list of things that are required for any discretionary permit application. Depending on the context, we might even require floor plans so we can understand what's going on in the interior of the building.
okay? And very last thing, under the description or designation of limited outdoor storage of flammable materials, just for clarification, would that exclude arbitrary storage of non-flammable materials in that area?
Yes, it would not allow storage of any other types of materials. And I just want to ask you for clarification where you're reading limited storage of is it from the description in the staff report, or are you finding it in the zoning text?
No, I was actually just looking at your staff report on the first page under the subject line, and it says
Okay.
allow limited outdoor storage of flammable materials, which by reading it we all assume, okay, it's flammable materials, but I just wondered if that precludes any business who applies for this from saying, this is kind of in the way, let's put this out there in that area.
The exception permit granted would only authorize storage of those types of materials. It would not allow carte blanche. And should enforcement be required, we would be enforcing the removal of any non-permitted items in that
Okay.
storage area.
That's all I have. Thank
But
you.
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure there's no, the language in the zoning text amendments, there's no reference to limited. It is very qualitative in terms of whatever materials they are, they have to comply with our performance standards and health safety codes.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
I have some questions.
Commissioner Patel?
Why did we choose, Juliet, why did we choose a zoning administrator versus the planning commission or some other commission?
I think the primary reason is because most of the performance standard compliance is fairly easy to verify. As Commissioner Mackin asked, we would require a site plan that's showing us where is this to be located. Is it interfering with parking? Is it going to be in a setback? That's a fairly, I would say, non-discretionary kind of finding, which seems appropriate to make on a administrative kind of level. The second portion being compliance with fire and building code standards. Again, that's something that's kind of an administrative determination made by the people that implement those laws and codes. So because those kind of primary findings being very matter of fact and kind of the application will kind of state that on its face, there didn't seem to be a ton of discretion associated with it. That would warrant every application to be heard by the commission. But again, that being said, the ZA in our code has the authority to refer any case to the commission that I think based on their judgment, and again, that's community development director who's our ZA, that in their judgment would be worthy of some sort of discretionary or higher level review, I suppose, that requires potentially a public hearing.
So you'd indicated that when the zoning administrator makes these determinations, neighbors are notified, well, at least for the solar or whatnot, so that they can have a say in whether something gets approved or not. Who are the neighbors that would get notified?
Sure. So I use that example just kind of to illustrate why we came to this process. But if you look at the attachment to the resolution, so page H.2.10, section 3 of the draft ordinance sets out the actual exception permit process language. And it says under subsection D, notification to neighboring property owners. That would be property owners and occupants on both sides of, to the rear, and directly across the street from the property on which the materials are proposed to be stored. So they would receive a notice that describes the nature, design, location of the proposed storage, and advise them that they can submit written comments with not less than 3 weeks from the date they received the notice. And after that point, the zoning administrator would act on the application after that notification period has passed.
So my concern is that a lot of properties that are in Crocker Park are adjacent to the Crocker Park Trail, right? And so people in all parts of Brisbane use the Crocker Park Trail, or at least they have the option to, maybe not today or tomorrow, but maybe sometime in the future, or maybe sometimes in the past. And so if there is a issue with someone storing, and someone storing items on a piece of property there, then the community in general wouldn't get notice that there's a proposal to store these items. And then my secondary concern is that the reason why, well, one of the justifications for having this is that because there's a lot of leakage inside and there's not enough ventilation. So when I put those two together, it seems as though there should be some opportunity for the community, if there is volatile materials outside and then they're using this park and there's leakage, to complain someplace, or at least have had a say in whether they should have been there in the first place.
First of all, I do want to clarify, we didn't get any notification from fire or like specific incidents of real like health safety, like actual, leaking things in buildings that had to, create immediate action. They saw conditions that were not compliant that were then rectified, and there wasn't, anyway. And yes, I hear that comment. If you think that a public hearing is something that's always warranted, then we can kind of workshop this, I would assume, and if the rest of your commission feels the same way, which again, this is a public hearing, so we might want to open the public hearing and then take it back to discussion. But if you all are interested in considering a different type of process for this, then that's something we could discuss, I think, in a workshop or study session scenario.
Another possibility to throw out there is well, and actually I think we already do put notices. They don't happen very often. The ZA hearings are not as frequent as Planning Commission, but we do have on the website notices for ZA.
Well, the ZA does have hearings that are public hearings, and they're noticed just like any other hearing. This would be just a written notification. Right,
But that might be something
it could be
we
a public
amend,
hearing
yeah.
process
Right, yeah. Either way.
versus the notification process.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're thinking about, we should, I think, open the public hearing, see if anyone in the audience wants to speak, and then take it back to discussion. We can talk about different processes that could better address your concerns. If that sounds okay.
So any of these businesses that will be storing flammable material outdoors, will there be a sign near it notifying anybody who might be walking nearby that, they are near something that is flammable?
Not being an expert on fire code, I cannot speak to when that might be required, but in general, I often see signs that warn people if there is an actual and real reason to warn people that something could be dangerous. But I would leave that to the county to determine.
If I may, Madam Chair? Oh,
Commissioner
you were
Becker.
first.
No, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say those diamond signs, typically, they have the ratings on them, the danger. You know what I'm talking about, the diamond sign?
Yes. So
And that's kind of a universal
So it will be there, okay.
That would have to, I would assume that would have to be on.
Yeah, I apologize for not having a better grasp on fire code, but I can't imagine a scenario in which something that actually required notification for public health purposes would not have a sign if it needed.
I'm pretty positive too, and whatever the storage is, it would be subject to state fire code for any kind of signage, and I'll go out on a limb and say I'm pretty positive that that is the case, and anytime you have a storage area for flammables.
Commissioner Gomez?
Yeah, I appreciate Commissioner Patel's broader comments around kind of public awareness, public safety, and wanting to have a say if a said business is storing flammable materials outside. Then I go back to, it would seem that, within the, fire code and so forth, that there wouldn't be a dangerous amount being stored outside. I mean, I'm just trying to logically work through this in my head, right? It's really kind of a question around volume for me. Like, what are we actually talking about? Because, for example, we have a propane business right there on, San Bruno and Bayshore, right? Granted, different area, probably different regulatory requirements and stuff. That's a very, hazardous location, and how many thousands of cars drive by there every single day? And I'm just trying to kind of process this in my head that I do think there should be a public discussion if there were to be an applicant that was looking to somehow, because this is an exception process, right? This is what we're talking about, is an exception process. If it was a large volume of materials, I think that's really where the concern would be, because I bet you right now, well, I'm speculating, but if we were to go and just walk around, there's probably a lot of barbecue propane tanks and things like that that are out and about. I mean, that's probably within, permissible use, right? I mean, those are hazardous, but it's a small volume, right? Again, I go back to the volume question. So I really think that's the heart of this. For me, that's my reading of all this.
Could I just ask, it seems like we're kind of going into discussion, so do you want to
Sure.
open the public hearing?
Sure.
Okay.
We will now open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak? I see no one. Oh, would you like to speak? Okay. Okay, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close public hearing.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we'll go back to our discussion. Commissioner Patel.
So I think that my concerns are then, based on what you said, dual too. I think that because there are public areas in Crocker Park where people wouldn't have notice, only neighbors would have notice of storage of outdoor materials, that it would make sense to have some sort of avenue for there to be public notice and public input. And it has to do primarily with volume, but also to the thing that to what Commissioner Mackin says, we don't know right now what these flammable materials are. When you're walking around a neighborhood, sure, it may be propane, but these are now we're in an industrial area. There might be other volatile materials. People should have the ability to comment on whether there should be an exception to these volatile areas, especially if they're running around Crocker Park or biking around Crocker Park or taking their kids for walks around Crocker Park, that they should have an input as to whether these exceptions should be made or not.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, Commissioner Mackin?
I can see two sides to this. I appreciate what Commissioner Patel is saying, in that one could cite Lippman School and the proximity to businesses in Crocker, and perhaps an exception permit for a business below Lippman might be objectionable to some people in Brisbane, saying that's just too close. The other side of the coin, I go, okay, North County Fire Authority, they've dealt with several fires on the mountain. They're going to look at defensible space. They're going to look at the exact location for something to be stored, and echoing Commissioner Gomez's concerns about volume of what's stored, they're going to look at that, because if it's exceeding what they think is defensible, they're going to say no, because they don't want to fight that kind of fire, and they don't want to see a loss of life or property, and they don't want to see the whole mountain go up either. So I don't know the middle ground. I don't see an objection to requiring the public hearings, because I would not anticipate that we're going to have a ton of these exception permits applied for. And I don't have any other comment other than that.
So my comment would, I agree. I think that there's no downside to having a public hearing, and so putting an avenue where there is a public hearing where people are noticed. My concern is not only just the fire, where, you know, North County Fire would be saying that these volatile materials are not a hazard, but it's also to, what if there are materials that are just chemicals that people don't want around their children? They're not a fire hazard. They may be caustic. They may be chemicals that they don't want their kids to be exposed to. If there is a leak, they should have an opportunity to voice those concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I do have somewhat of a safety concern regarding the potential leak issue. I mean, I don't know. Could someone walking by a business that's storing one of these flammable materials, I mean, and they're smoking and they throw something near, not knowing, or maybe they didn't see a clear sign, not knowing that there's something there, and, you know, you're creating a danger, you know, that's the potential. But I do have a concern that, you know, with every application that, you know, we're going to have a hearing on this for the public to come and speak. I mean, is that too cumbersome on the process and on the businesses that, you know, every time, you know, I mean, is this pretty standard to where, you know, staff, you know, can handle it and they can use their judgment? I mean, or is this something where we need to have a hearing every time somebody wants to store something flammable outside? So is this too much bureaucracy? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to balance safety with, you know, trying to be just practical as well.
I have a suggestion. Perhaps, and I'm not sure how to approach this, so if my fellow commissioners could assist here, if we included a provision asking that any evaluations of applications take into account proximity to public areas and schools and areas in frequent circulation by the public.
Such as the post office, for example.
Correct. Or it could be a trail or a meeting place, or it would just be an advisory note, both to staff and the applicant, that it should have a little scrutiny based on those criteria.
I don't have a problem with that, with including that language, and I agree with you, like, not everything has to be very bureaucratic, but when it has to deal with the enjoyment of someone's ability to use a public space and they haven't had a chance to voice their concerns, I think that's offensive. So I'm not trying to increase bureaucracy, and to the extent that Commissioner Mackin said that, you know, there probably aren't going to be that many applications, we don't know that it's really going to clog the system per se.
Staff, you have any comments on how, you know, we can weave all these concerns and,
So just a couple thoughts, and Julia might have some others as well, but just I guess two things that come to mind is, one is on the setback, that this would not be allowed within a setback area, so it wouldn't be allowed right up to the property line. You already have a certain setback. I believe it's 10 feet on both the rear and sides. I forget what the front is, but it wouldn't be in the front yard anyway, but rear and sides. Also, you'd have some kind of screening, and I wouldn't see that as a landscape screening for this kind of thing. I would see it as more of a fence or a wall. I'm thinking also we could, to cover the bases, and I believe it, I'm sure it's included in the state fire code in terms of signage, but we could have a standard condition possibly as to or performance standard. Julie would have to look at how this is structured. She put this together. But that, where was I going? Essentially, that signage be required as a standard kind of condition, subject to fire department approval, something to that effect. So there's an alert that there's got to be some sort of informational signage outside these areas. Just a few thoughts.
Well, and then relative to, again, Commissioner Patel's concern with expanding public participation and comment on these types of applications. I mean, it could be, rather than a written notification process, that it's a hearing, zoning administrator hearing, which is a public hearing, so has the standard, we could have the standard 300-foot notice. That would be for any other discretionary permit. So there is I'm not feeling at this point whether or not there's a overwhelming urge for you as a body to see these applications. So if you can kind of give us better direction on that, I'm still not clear on that. If the ZA is a body that you think is the appropriate level with expanded public notification and participation, or are you concerned with that it's not coming to you?
Middle ground too, if I might interject here as well, is since it's already written as a 21-day notice, which is actually longer than most other applications. Kind of a middle ground might be that the notice also be to the public posting places, which would include outside City Hall, up at Mission Blue, the library, and then we also do our website, so that somebody who is interested could write in, and if concerns were raised at that point, it might be something that the ZA would refer to the Planning Commission. So that might be a kind of a in between that. It's not an actual public hearing, but they have notices out and opportunity to weigh in. I don't know.
And I believe when the zoning administrator is assessing an application, the receipt of written concerns and public comments is usually a really clear signal at that time that it's something to be referred to the commission. And I can't think of a recent example of something being referred to you all from the ZA, but it certainly has happened over time. So, but anyway, we've asked you for some feedback, so if you have the feedback about how you feel about the ZA as a body overall versus the Planning Commission, I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Are the ZA meetings publicized?
Yes. Sorry. The only difference with zoning administrator meetings from your meetings is that your meetings are regular, second and fourth Thursdays, sorry, at specific times. Zoning administrator meetings are typically scheduled, they have to be kind of during the workday. And so they still have the same amount of public notice, 10 days public noticing, obviously for any public hearing, but they would occur during working hours at City Hall, and it depends on the availability of the applicant, and it's not a regular meeting date that occurs at a set time all the time. But it is notified and publicly noticed like any other meeting.
And there's two different levels here. One is as written. It's essentially it's a notice that goes out, and there's an opportunity to comment, and the ZA would then make his determination once that period passes. The other is an actual ZA public hearing. So two different levels there.
The way that it's written, is the exception basically always followed?
You mean like what would the criteria be to deny an
Right.
exception? The criteria to deny it would be if it doesn't comply with the performance standards and it can't comply with health and safety codes. It couldn't be approved at that point. I think, again, as I said, with the as written with the notification process, should any written comments be received, that bring up concerns with the proposal, at that point, it's something that would probably trigger a referral to the commission. But I'm trying to think of the solar permits that we've processed through that process. Typically, it's something that's approved if it complies with health and safety code. We've never received, at least in the time I've been here, negative comments on that type of exception permit. So the ZA at that time is able to make the determination that it's compliant with all safety codes. We don't have any concerns that were provided to us in that noticing window, implying that the more discretionary aspects of it, we'll say, are found to be acceptable by the neighboring community. Then that informs the ZA's decision to approve or disapprove. So if the findings can be made and no public opposition or general concerns or comments is voiced, and the ZA can make those findings, then it would be approved, like any other permit.
Okay. So staff is looking for like a direction that from us as to where we're going. Is that what I hear?
I guess what I was asking was, the concerns I heard from you were based on public notification and participation.
Right.
So I was curious whether that was driven by the draft language, using the ZA as the venue, or was it using a notification process only to certain neighbors? I just wanted to kind of tease out how your concerns could be met with potentially, revising the ordinance or.
Sure. So my concerns are, one, the notice, that only neighbors would get notice when there's when the public at large is using the property. So that is one concern. So if we can address that, I like the idea of the 21-day notice, posting various locations that are public locations. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the ZA being the authoritative body. I think it does put stress on people when they want to make objections, and it's during the day and people have jobs, so it's only people that can get away from their jobs that can actually make objections, which I find objectionable. So,
Well, if I may, through the
sorry.
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, just to clarify. So the way it's written, and of course, if you have modifications you want to make, you can do that. But it's a 21-day notice, and that gives an opportunity for people to write in their objections, and then the ZA would make a determination, taking any information that came in into account, and then there's essentially the ZA would provide the notice shall advise the applicant and recipients of the right to appeal the ZA's decision. So once he or she has made the decision, the ZA, I skipped a sentence. This is on H210. The ZA shall notify the applicant and each person who has submitted written comments on the application of the ZA's decision to grant or deny the application, and then they have a right to appeal that to
Right. So
the commission.
if the process as written was to move forward, anyone who submitted written, so what I'm hearing is there should be a broader notification radius, right? The adjacent neighbors to the sides and rear and front is not adequate. That's what I'm hearing from
yes.
Commissioner Patel. So at the very baseline, broader notification is required. Could be in public locations, or would be the public locations and city website. And then as Ken read, the way it's currently written, so that would be broader noticing. People would have opportunity to write in within that 3 weeks. If the ZA, I can't imagine a situation like this where the ZA would not refer something that got a lot of public comment and concern to the commission, but in that hypothetical scenario that they did and still decided to have a hearing on it, anyone who had written comments would get notified of that decision and of their right to appeal it to you. So it would come to you should someone be unhappy with the outcome of the ZA's decision. So there's two avenues basically within the process as written that it could come to you if it became a matter of public concern. So if we're able to expand the noticing reach, would the way it's written be acceptable, or are you still looking for some additional tweaks to process? And these are questions for everyone. I know I'm looking at
I have a question.
Commissioner Patel.
So when you're saying that any appeal will come to us, so will the ZA wouldn't be doing a public hearing, he will just be making a decision?
So there's two avenues. In the zoning ordinance, there's a lot of things the ZA could potentially hear, even certain variances, which I don't think the ZA would ever act on a variance here. But the code authorizes the zoning administrator to hear certain types of discretionary permit applications. The ordinance also authorizes and states that anything that the ZA could make a decision on, they also have the ability to say, I'm not going to be the hearing body here. I'm going to refer this to the commission for whatever reason. Usually, again, if it's something that is of public interest, of particular public interest, but there's a variety of reasons why it could be referred to you by the ZA. So that's one path. The ZA makes that decision. I'm not going to act on this. I'm referring this to the commission. It comes to you as a normal public hearing discretionary permit application. So that's path one. Path two is the ZA does act on the application, and then their decision is appealed, and then it comes to you as an appeal of the ZA's decision. Does that make sense?
Who has a right to appeal?
I think anyone.
Anyone. All they have to do
Anyone
is
in the city.
file an appeal with the city clerk.
Okay.
Or two council members could appeal.
Right.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to propose something and you guys can tell me what you think. I think I'm fine with the ZA making the authority or making the decision with the notice and the broader public notice. If there are letters, I would like the letters to be published on the website, so that people in the community can know what other people in the community are concerned about and have an opportunity to respond either via letter to those concerns. So the process may take more than 21 days. It may take a little longer, and that's something that staff can determine. But once there's been an initial ability to write letters and then another ability to respond to letters, then I wouldn't have a problem with the ZA making the decision or to then referring it to the body.
The ZA would respond to the letters who's responding to the letters?
So
The
my
public?
take on it is like there's going to be an application. There's going to be 21 days for people to write in letters, and then the ZA would make a decision based on those letters. Well, there might be people in the community that don't even know that there's certain things that they should be concerned about. So those public letters that are initially sent to the ZA, if they are published on the website, then other people would have notice about what people in the community are concerned about, and therefore decide also to write letters.
Okay, sorry, I just heard you say that the letters would be answered, and I wanted to understand what that meant. I hear that. I'm trying to think of procedurally how that would be implemented.
I'm
So
struggling with that one a little bit too. We don't, so letters that come in on any application are public. They're available to the public.
Yeah, because like say for a typical application that's heard by you all, if we get letters prior to a staff report being published, they're attached to your staff report. If they come in after the staff report's published, you get them on the dais. And in past cases, we've had requests to post them on the website as well. Ultimately, they're always in the planning application file, which is a public file that anyone can come in and look at if they're interested. But I hear what you're saying is that you're really looking for like almost like a community forum or like message board where it's like, hey, did you know this was happening? Like,
No.
submit comments.
Something
so-
that staff could do, I think, as a matter of just procedure, is to make sure that in that notice that we essentially state that any correspondence that comes in will be part of the public record and available to the larger public to view upon request.
So when you guys publish things for example, the planning commission, and like you said, like if there are letters, they're attached to the staff report, they're online. So if people want to go and check and see what those documents are, attachments are, they can click on them and they can know what's going to be discussed, or if there are letters, what people in the community are saying or what people are saying. With the current process as I see it is, if there's a 21-day notice with public notification and people send letters in, people would have to know there's no way, where do they go to figure out what letters have been sent in?
It would be a totally in-person kind of situation.
Right.
We don't have a procedure right now for sharing every written correspondence that comes in on these types of permits. I don't mean that to say it can't and never will happen. I'm just trying to explain that we don't have a procedure for that right now. We would have to kind of think about how to implement that.
And I guess with the planning commission, it's a little bit of more of a stepped process, because you do have a public hearing with a staff report that if any correspondence comes in before the staff report is actually put out to the public, those will get embedded into an attachment. But then letters after that are just available, for instance, at the desk out there that people can view.
And kept in the physical file.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say we can't do what you're asking. So we just need to figure out how we would do it.
I don't necessarily feel like there needs to be a public hearing like this where everyone gathers and says, or has an opportunity to speak and there's a debate or whatever. But I do feel like there has to be I would like there to be at least some way that the public can comment and have access to what other people are saying about potential sites around Crocker Trail that may or may not be exposed to chemicals. Volatile or non-volatile.
It might be something that we do, maybe, I'm thinking more as a matter of just procedure on administrative action that we, when we have these applications come up, we're talking about posting them anyhow, and so maybe we have a link that if there is actual correspondence that comes in, that takes people to that as a web page item.
Yeah, I think there's nothing in our zoning ordinance, for example, that says we have to put staff reports on the website. I mean, all the things we do electronically, I think, are done for, sunshine laws and general public information that we want to be accessible. So I think that's something we could handle administratively. I guess, that's where I was struggling. I was like, how would we put that into the zoning ordinance language? I don't think it belongs there, because it really is an implementation and administration kind of requirement for staff. So I think it's something we can do. That was where I was kind of having a struggle, is where does it fit in the actual zoning text amendment language? I don't think it does. So as an administrative and implementation kind of thing, I think we can do what you're asking.
Okay.
I mean, I know we can, we'll just have to figure it out.
Okay, so what you're going to try to do is, it'll be the ZA's, when someone applies, to store flammable materials outside, there's going to be on the city's website that there's been this application. And then there's going to be a link to, people are invited to make comments. There's going to be a link to take people to those letters?
That's where I was kind of concerned with. We don't have a function. We piloted a kind of community forum function with the Parkside plan that didn't really take off. We're not doing it anymore. So I think what I'm hearing from Commissioner Patel is that there should be somewhere online that someone who's interested can look and see, there's an exception request for outdoor storage at this location. oh, someone's written in letters, I would like to read those and I might want to submit my own. So to me, I see it being very similarly set up to how we would have like a commission, not a meeting webpage. It would probably be one dedicated page with like a running list of applications that could have links to whatever documents are submitted under the particular application notice. That's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing that you want like an actual like back and forth discussion going on online.
No.
Okay.
So the change to the actual ordinance that we're talking about is really just a broader noticing on the public places, so more people out in the public can be aware.
Because you're saying that any decision by the ZA, currently the code allows for people to appeal to us, so that's already in there.
Right.
Okay.
The code already allows for that. The notice would inform people of that. So, okay, if we want to, is everyone on board with the way the conversation is going before we go any further? Okay. So, if you look at the draft ordinance, page H2.10, so section 3 is the exception permit process. So subsection D is notification to neighboring property owners. So I would recommend then, based on the feedback I'm hearing, that we just call that notification. And prior to granting or denying an exception permit, the ZA shall give written notice of the application to property owners, blah, blah, blah. And then we'll add standard language that the notice shall also be published in the city's official posting locations as well as the city's website.
Yes.
Okay. And I might actually also recommend rolling what's currently subsection E, just deleting, making it part of subsection D. I don't know why it's separated. It's describing the ZA's notification of the applicant and anyone who submits written comments. I think that should all be included in the notification subsection D, rather than calling it out into subsection E.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Commissioner Mackin, you had something else?
I still have a concern, because people will do what they're going to do, that there can be potential usage of this flammable storage area by things that are not flammable, and you might say, what's the problem? Except that if you talk in the firefighter terminology, they consider non-flammables fuel. And I have a concern about that, because if you have flammables and then you add fuel, you're creating a hazard. So I'm at a loss as to where it might go, but I would like to see something saying that outdoor storage areas to be used only for specified containers and not for storage of other items. Just so that you have an annual inspection, or the permit is first issued, the fire inspector goes in and goes, everything looks great. And 6 months later, somebody starts going, oh, we have these other things, nowhere to put them. Well, just put them out there in that area. That it's really clear that is not allowed. Because they'll say, but these are unflammable, there's no problem.
I would just say that the language, the title of the section, which is exception permit for outdoor storage of movable flammable materials, the language saying, except as provided in this section, no business or other use shall conduct outdoor storage of movable containers used to store flammable materials within the TC1 district. The findings to grant, I mean, every aspect of the exception permit process says that this is for this specific class of materials.
Mm-hmm.
The references in the performance standards, section 17.19.050, again says all routine aspects of day-to-day operations of a business, including all storage of materials and products, shall take place entirely within a building with the following exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Commercial recreation, parking of operable vehicles, shipments and deliveries incidental to the primary use, and then movable containers. So I hear what you're saying. I'm at a loss as well as to how we can make it any clearer in the code that the only thing being allowed in that exception permit is these containers used to store these materials. I think it is stated very clearly in the exception permit process as well as the performance standards that nothing else is authorized. So it would be a standard condition of approval. Any subsequent inspections obviously would I don't see any case where an applicant could either get the impression or justify storage of anything other than the very discrete class of materials that are named in this ordinance. I'm not saying that people might not try, but as you know, we've talked about outdoor storage in Crocker in general as an and how we deal with that on an enforcement basis. Just because outdoor storage is and has been not permitted in Crocker doesn't mean people aren't doing it. And so that's that is a larger issue that we have of people conducting their business that not in compliance with our regulations. I think the intent here is to allow a regulatory path for a certain kind of activity that has real benefit from a public health safety standpoint, knowing that, you know, it's still going to require enforcement, it's still going to require inspections and everything that we do normally, and we'll probably, you know, ramp up, especially if we actually have an active permit. That's a very long response to your question.
It is.
Let you.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate, just because I am really concerned about people's health and safety. And this is the point where we need to air it all out. So I'm not in disagreement with what you're saying. Again, I'm going to go back to somebody has a business and they go and they buy some brand new containers of mineral spirits, and they go, you know, I don't know where to put these. Oh, the flammable cabinet indoors is full. We'll just put them outside in the flammable storage area. Those are flammable materials. They don't belong outside. So my problem is that if North County Fire is the authority to specify what is suitable for outdoor storage, I'd at least like something saying for storage of specified flammables, so that it's not leaving it arbitrarily to a business to decide what's a suitable flammable to store. Because again, on an annual inspection, and it could be on the annual inspection, they're not there anymore, but then they're put in there again. And I just think people's logic of, well, it's flammable, there's the storage area. So something just, I don't know how to do it, but specified flammable materials.
So maybe the exception would list these flammable items the applicant is requesting.
Yes. Or if we even said approved flammable items or containers. Approved. That might just do it right there.
Approved by
Only
the fire.
approved.
Yeah. Okay, so we would, or my response then would be, look at the subsection A, requirement for an exception permit, and revising the language as written to read, except as provided in this section, no business or other use shall conduct outdoor storage of flammable material. Okay, let's see. No other use shall conduct outdoor storage of specified flammable materials approved by the North County Fire Authority within the TC1 district, something to that effect. Without actually going into naming the particular materials.
Specified approved.
Yeah. And then similarly renaming, like, the title of the section, for example, we would say outdoor storage of approved flammable materials.
And I appreciate your indulgence on this. I had a business. I watched other businesses near me. You'd think no one would want to burn their building down. I saw 2 fires because people just said, there's no problem. I'm not going to have a problem. And I heard stories from insurance adjusters that I had to work with on what people actually do. And it's really mind-bending when you hear those stories. So I'm really concerned about public safety.
I hear you.
Thank you for bearing with me on that.
I would also then modify subsection C under the findings. So basically anywhere in the ordinance that uses the terminology flammable materials or, movable containers storing flammable materials, we would rephrase that or qualify it to say approved by the county, as specified and approved by the North
Right.
County Fire Authority, anywhere in the chapter that it's referenced.
Thank you. That little bit makes a difference.
Okay, so would you like us to come back with a red line ordinance, with a revised red line ordinance, or are you comfortable moving forward with the way we've responded?
I think I'm comfortable.
Verbally.
We were all pretty clear on what needs to be done, so. Anybody else have any other comments?
So so staff is just gonna work on the notice thing where there's gonna be like a link or something.
Yeah, what I'm imagining is a page for the zoning administrator, which I don't think we even have right now. So it's probably a good idea for us to do this as we think about modernizing our website. So like the planning commission has a landing page, have a landing page for the zoning administrator. And we already have notices for any hearing body on one page. Maybe we would have notices for the ZA on the ZA dedicated page, so that then we could have for any notice, like a written notice, then we could have associated written correspondence received on it. So that's what I'm envisioning, but
Perfect.
yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, may I have a motion to recommend the city council approve of the draft zoning text with all the additional amendments we requested from staff via adoption of resolution RZ-3-18?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I will now read the appeals process. Anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Commission's decision. Exceptions to the 15-day filing period include the following. Appeals shall be filed with the city clerk within 6 days of the Commission's actions for use permits and variances, and 10 calendar days for tentative maps and advertising sign applications. An application form and fee is required to make a formal appeal. Next is items initiated by staff. Staff, do we have anything?
Yes, a couple items. So the tree ordinance went to city council just last Thursday, and there was quite a bit of discussion, but essentially the gist of it is that they're going to have a ad hoc subcommittee, and they'll be it's still in process, I think, as to the structure, but I think they'll be tapping into one of the planning commissioners and one of the OSEC members just to get some more direct feedback on that. So we'll update you more as that moves along. And just last Saturday we had the second of the community conversation events, and that went well, I think. And there's some information actually on our website now that's been updated there. So people want to go to the website, there's some information. I think it was just put up today, so. And then third item was that there was a training, a Home for All Planning Commission training on the 30th, and so I'll tee that up for you all. I guess 4 of you went, and I'm not sure which 4, but if you wanted to provide any updates on that, leave that open to you. And I think that's it. Anything else?
Yeah, I thought it was great. Especially there was a session about ADUs that I thought maybe, the public might, be interested in if, we might do an expanded workshop on it. I don't know. I think we found it very helpful, and it provided information that we were not exposed to before. So.
Yeah, I second that. I think it would be beneficial to have a public workshop around ADUs and get the same, forgetting the name, is it Housing for All? I might be forgetting the organization.
Silicon Valley Trust.
Silicon Valley, but there was
is
another
the
organization.
primary.
Isn't there another organization? The gentleman who spoke, I thought, was with a different organization.
He was
21 Elements convened it, but they may have
Right.
had Home for All staff talking about it. So can you clarify? So they were kind of walking through like the actual steps and designing and building an ADU. Is that what they were?
It was financing,
Okay.
just all the details involved. I mean, it's very, detailed as to the
Mhm.
steps. And I think if you're just a homeowner and is interested in something like this, I don't think you really understand everything that's involved.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I think financing was also a big issue, and there's also funding help within the community that they can, try to, get if they're interested.
Yeah, I know they've been doing countywide workshops. Like there was one in San Mateo a couple months ago, which we did have like 2 people come in. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. I think 2 people came in who actually said, "Oh, I attended this workshop and like it got me really excited about it," and they submitted applications, or at least are intending to. So the county, I know they're doing workshops throughout the county, but we can ask them if they want to do the workshop here. I think it would probably be something, especially dealing with the financing aspect, it's probably not something staff would do, but we would be happy to host a workshop here. That would be more convenient for residents than something in, Foster City or something. So we can reach out if you think it's a good idea.
The important part with Silicon Valley Trust, which the name's a misnomer, they cover 13 counties. And the important part about that workshop was some information I hadn't seen, and I have to thank
On loans?
staff on loans. I have to thank staff for the article in the Star about ADUs and promoting that. But the financing aspect, what was eye-opening on that is that there are avenues to finance it through Silicon Valley Trust. There was an article in the paper. It's in conjunction with Wells Fargo Bank is providing incentives to that. But it also detailed how much money people that are building them, where they're finding their sources, a lot of people looking at their second mortgage on their house, but the importance that ultimately financing this, how do you convert this to a conventional mortgage? And that often makes or breaks someone's approach to whether they want to do it. And permitting fees. So that's something, and I asked John, do we have permit fees? Some communities have waived those on ADUs. And
Well,
he-
state law requires that any fee charged for an ADU, that there be a nexus to the actual, every fee we charge has to have a nexus to the actual service that's provided, but particularly for ADUs, they usually get hit pretty hard with like sewer connection fees or water connection fees, or they did in the past. And new state law in the past 2 years has required that those fees be significantly reduced. We already don't have significant, we rarely require meter upsizing. Well, I shouldn't say. I think it's rare that we require those types of punitive or burdensome sewer or water connection fees as a jurisdiction. So there already are some controls for the city. We already reduced our ADU application fee. We cut it in half, I think.
And there's actually not a application fee except for the building permit fee.
No, there
If
is.
they're doing just within the
Right.
envelope of the existing home. So say it's a basement area that they can build out to an ADU, there's no additional fee besides the.
Other than the building permit fees. Yeah. And I've heard the state is working on fixing what I thought was, you know, with all this fee streamlining for ADUs, school fees were still potentially applied. So the school charges you whenever you add on to your house over a certain square footage. And we don't have control over that. So even if we waived all our fees, potentially a ADU, if it's a new construction project, could be subject to hefty school fees. And I think there's a bill in the works that would, you know, who knows at this point in the legislative session what will happen to it, but that would also reduce potentially school impact fees, although I think there's probably more there about, you know, if you're creating a new household that potentially might actually have children in it, whether there's still a nexus between schools or not. But so there is a movement at the state level to really discourage or prohibit cities from having exorbitant fees. When it comes to waiving all fees, I mean, I think that's a bigger kind of policy issue that we certainly haven't tackled here in Brisbane.
I mean, I think the important other takeaway with this is that when I talk to people in town about them, and they'll say, I don't have the money, I don't want to take a second on my house, and the gentleman with Silicon Valley Trust recognized all of this and actually very detailed presentation on how you can actually go about doing this.
That's great.
And I think the value there to me was so significant that the average person here, last weekend there was a seminar in San Mateo, I think it was, the same topic, including I think the same speaker we heard. But it doesn't mean people will go if they think, oh, I just can't afford it, I can't make the numbers work. But that is what needs to be heard. And maybe if we sponsored that on a local level right here where people could come and we said there are viable ways to make this pencil out financially, and we can explain how. Not just find out if you can do it, but there are ways to make it work financially, because he outlined a lot of opportunities that I never have heard from anybody. It was really good.
Yeah, we can reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to do one here.
And also after our meeting, they did email us and sent a link to the slide presentation that they, had. So all the information is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So yeah, we could link to it from our website. If I'm assuming it'll be public if they're doing this presentation across the county. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, anything else?
That's it for staff.
Okay, items initiated by the commission. Is there anything? Nope, there is none. So can I have a motion that we adjourn to our next regular meeting of Thursday, May 23rd, 2019?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.